The story of Afghanistan has been front-page news for quite some time, and rightly so. In one respect, it shows how waging a war, occupation, and a retreat can destroy a country. And that is what the U.S. and its NATO partners have done. Hi, I'm Kavita Hway, and in this edition of Economic Divide, we will look at Afghanistan's economy and where it's going to be headed to next, what's left of it, under the Taliban. The exorbitant U.S. spending in the Afghan war, $2.26 trillion, corruption, waste, unfinished projects, and an expense that will continue for quite some time, even after the U.S. pullout. That's in the form of interests. Was it worth it? Also, we're going to take a look at the Afghan economy under the Taliban. What was the economy before they took control? And what will be their source of revenues? Will they discontinue their opium sales? Our in-depth section will cover that. And then we will take a look at what Afghanistan prides itself in terms of its products and commodity, and that is its wealth minerals. China has practically welcomed the Taliban with open arms. Is that due to the One Belt, One Road project, or with an eye on Afghanistan's mineral wealth?
The U.S. war in Afghanistan has ended after 20 years. The U.S. president justified his withdrawal.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way.
The current cost, to date, $2.261 trillion. This is the breakdown. The DoD, largest spending, $933 billion. The interest, a staggering $530 billion, something the U.S. has to continue paying even after the war has ended. But what does the U.S. have to show for it? This called SIGAR, Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, created by U.S. Congress to provide independent and objective oversight of Afghanistan reconstruction projects and activities. Report after report, the naked truth was revealed. Shocking. Corruption and waste were rampant. The latest report confirmed more or less what the previous reports revealed. Titled, What We Need to Learn, Lessons from 20 Years of Afghanistan Reconstruction, it concluded the U.S. failed to implement a coherent strategy in over 20 years. It did not understand the Afghan context and failed to tailor its efforts accordingly. We were devoid of a fundamental understanding. We did not know what we were doing. Many of the institutions and infrastructure projects the U.S. had built were not sustainable or even usable.
To me, it's billions of dollars that probably have been wasted. We've built schools that are falling down. We've built clinics that there are no doctors for. We've built roads that are falling apart.
Some examples of this waste. Tarkil Power Plant, $335 million, used but not as intended and in a deteriorated condition. The Wardak National Police Training Center, $98 million, used as intended but deteriorated. The most critical failure, the Afghan Army. $88.3 billion spent for training and equipping.
When you take a look at the Afghan economy, it wasn't a functioning economy based on, for example, supply and demand. There were other factors which spurred economic activity. Afghanistan is extremely poor, landlocked, and highly dependent on foreign aid. Corruption, insecurity, weak governance, lack of infrastructure pose challenges to future economic growth. The Afghan economy sustained nearly a decade of strong growth, international assistance, which pledged around $86.8 billion. The country's gross domestic product, estimated at $22 billion, has grown nearly threefold since the Taliban were driven from power back in 2001. According to the World Bank, 3/4 of the government's budget is funded by international donors. Well, the state of the economy, even with international assistance, was so weak that 90% of the population lives on less than $2 a day. That's according to the former President Ashraf Ghani. Our guest joining us for this edition of the program in this segment is Mohammad Daoud Abedi. He's the chairman of the Afghan Nation Peace Council. He was previously a spokesman and a negotiator for his Islami group. Okay, welcome, Muhammad Dawood. You are aware about the situation as it's unfolding in Afghanistan. Since the year 2001, the U.S. has spent, it's estimated $2.26 trillion. That has yielded a chaotic, humiliating end to America's longest war, because really the money is under question as to where it went. Corruption has been stated from both the U.S. and Afghan side. You have unfinished projects. So the question is, where did this money go? Why did that not get spent wisely in that country?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for your invitation. The money that the U.S. and other nations spent in Afghanistan were split it in different ways, and was spent in different ways. Some were, most big chunk of it were spent for military purposes, their own military, to come and fight the Afghans. It was not for the rebuild of Afghanistan or building structures in Afghanistan that could benefit the Afghan people in Afghanistan as a whole. A very big chunk of this was spent through the war. But the portion that was spent through the Afghan government and the NGOs, non-government organizations, that money that was spent in these two sectors was split again into two. Some were given to the NGOs and some were given to the Afghan government.
Okay, we appreciate that. Thank you, Muhammad Dawood, for that. Now, as you indicated, their money was misused and misappropriated, and nothing is more evident of that, in this case in point, than what was called Afghanistan's ghost money. This ghost money is in reference to a tactic that was used by the CIA to get money to Afghanistan. It's time now for our Info News section, where we take a look at news which may not be that up to date, but worth taking a look at, especially for one of our future programs. Our first story comes out of Haiti. Haiti was hit by a massive earthquake recently, which devastated parts of the island. In terms of the casualty figures, over 1,200 lives were lost. This comes after the assassination of its president, and as a consequence, now the economy has taken a beating. Haiti, with a population of 11 million, is considered the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Next story, U.S.-China trade. Haven't taken a look at that in a while. When it comes to trade tensions between the two, the U.S. better think twice about how much pressure it's exerting on China. The U.S.-China trade war is hurting America more than actually China. Trump's unprecedented tariffs and technology war with China, which is now passed on to Biden, is costing the U.S. economy, causing disruption to crucial supply chains and wild swings in prices overall. Next up, fake drugs, counterfeit drugs. They've always been a problem. One report revealed fake medicine now kills upwards of the figure that you're about to see here, which is quite astounding when you think about it in terms of the deaths. 1 million people, that's per year. Wonder how much that is every day. It's quite a bit. That's according to the World Health Organization. And that's 5 times actually more people that die than narcotics. I mean, the trade in fake drugs has proliferated so much during COVID that it has eclipsed the market, which has cocaine, heroin, and cannabis in it. So that's leading to more deaths than those illegal drugs. And our final look is at U.S. food stamps. This program in the U.S., the U.S. president just announced the biggest increase to the food stamps ever. Starting in October, food assistance benefits will increase by an average, which is one of its largest in its history, if not the largest, 25%. So the people receiving the food assistance are going to be happy to hear that. Average benefit, which was $121 before COVID, will now increase by $36 a month. Sounds good, but is it because the economy is not doing well for many Americans? It's something to think about. Okay, it's time now for a quick break here on Economic Divide, but we'll be right back after a quick pause. It's time now for our in-depth section. Now that the Taliban have overtaken Afghanistan, how are they going to make sure that they have an operational economy? Well, these are some of the questions that sooner rather than later they have to deal with. For example, how are they going to run a finance ministry and also a central bank? Central bank is obviously very key. As of now, the U.S. has actually blocked close to $9 billion of its money overseas. They're not going to let the Taliban access it. So that's going to be a very key question. Next up, how will foreign donors actually be able to trust them with aid? Now, the aid for Afghanistan is something that happens on a yearly basis. Many countries around the world contribute to Afghanistan because obviously it's a country that's been racked with wars, years of wars. So that's a very key question there also. And then the next question, since many of them are sanctioned, many Taliban members, how will they access the world financial system? I mean, that's really important. They need to transfer money. They need to have money coming in. How is that going to happen? I mean, as of this point, there isn't a system of governance in place in that country yet, at least as of the recording of this program. However, this is what a senior Taliban leader, his name is Wahidullah Hashemi, has said.
In future, this is not up to now discussed how it would be. Maybe we have a council, the head of the council, as you call the president, we would call that Rais al-Wazara, or the head of the council, and we will have ministers. All the ministers would be appointed by this council and by the head of the council.
Well, that's what he has said. Well, to begin with, generating income is going to be very important to the Taliban. That answer may come in the form of what is called the informal economy. Now, the informal economy has large amounts of hidden money in the war zone. First off, opiates, as you see here, trafficking in opium, hashish, methamphetamines, and other narcotics is said to bring the Taliban revenues of anywhere between $500 to $600 million yearly. Not bad, is it? Now, since they came to power, they have vowed not to continue this illegal trade. But the biggest kind of trade that happens, the real money, comes from another area that is not that well known. That is money which comes from the illegal movement of ordinary goods. Now, it consists of things like fuel and also consumer imports. So these are the goods that are flowing in through this, what we call informal economy, which is the illegal movement of goods in this case. In size and sum, the informal economy dwarfs international aid, which again flows into Afghanistan on a yearly basis. Now, let's take a look at that source of income, which is called the informal taxation. You have the informal economy and then the formal taxation. Fees for passage of goods is what I'm talking about here. This is the collection of fees by armed personnel, the Taliban, to allow safe passage of the goods. The money produced from this taxation, $235 million annually. Now, one of the largest income producers came from an area by the name of Zaranj. That's actually a city bordering Iran. Now, this city provided the government with roughly, again, these are rough numbers, $43.2 million in terms of annual duties. Also, an additional $50 million in direct taxes for the year 2020. There was also a significant amount of undeclared trade, particularly of fuel. Total revenues from this border crossing, $176 million per year. Now, the total amount of trade through all of Afghanistan's border crossings, that needs to be looked at. Here's a map of that. The border crossings are the ones in the green. You could see them here and here. That's the ranch that I just talked about. You have one over here, Ten Gural, which is over there, and you have about 4 or 5 more. Now, these revenues are estimated to be $2 billion per year. So you can see the money generated there is quite a bit. Now, once informal trade is included, that figure is going to be actually twice as high. Well, at this point, Afghans are definitely very worried about the chain of events that happened in their country with the collapse of the government. The Afghan money is quickly losing its value, especially, for example, in a neighboring country like Pakistan.
ये जो हालात बदल रहे दिन ब दिन पानी की जो पाकिस्तानी ज़रूफ़ीज़ है उसकी कदर बहुत कम हो चुका है। हम लोगों ने काफ़ी नुकसान उठाया है क्योंकि तालिबान के आने की वजह से या इतलात की वजह से पाकिस्तानी रुपये बढ़ गया और पानी जो है वो बहुत नीचे आ चुका है।
Well, let's get some analysis into the picture. Our guest Phyllis Bennis joins us. She is from the Institute for Policy Studies. Phyllis Bennis is an American writer. She's an activist and a political commentator featured on many television stations. Her focus has been mainly on issues related to West Asia and the United Nations. She's also a very strong critic of Israel and the United States and a leading advocate of Palestinian rights. All right, Phyllis, welcome. Looking at the time that the U.S. actually invaded Afghanistan, the year 2001, up to now, $2.26 trillion to have been spent. The Cost of War project at Brown University has calculated that. Now, this investment, if you want to call it that, has yielded a chaotic, humiliating end to America's longest war. What went wrong, Phyllis? Why is the Afghan government failing to deliver on its economic investments that were made by the U.S. or failed to do that and said to be rife with corruption and unfinished projects? I mean, after all, the U.S. spent $2 trillion there. And for what? That is the key question.
I think we have to recognize that the U.S. war in Afghanistan was always a kind of derivative war. It was a war of vengeance following the attacks of 9/11, despite the fact that none of the 9/11 hijackers were Afghan. They were Saudi and Egyptian. But the war was designed partly to keep up the level of tension in the United States, keep up U.S. support for a coming war in Iraq.
Mm-hmm. Phyllis Bennis there. Okay. She obviously says that that was not a democratic exercise when it came to the U.S. At least that's not the way that it went down. All right, our next piece now takes a look at the reasons behind this war, which was nothing short than a cash machine, especially for military contractors, as you're about to see.
It was one of the most revealing and shocking exposés to cover the U.S.-led Afghanistan war. Bold journalism, numerous testimonials, admissions too hard to swallow, revealing the truth about the Afghan war and the lies behind it. The Afghanistan Papers. U.S. officials constantly said they were making progress. They were not. And they knew it.
Thanks to our military and our allies and the brave fighters of Afghanistan, the Taliban regime is coming to an end.
For many of you, this will be your last tour in Afghanistan. And by the end of this year, the transition will be complete, and Afghans will take full responsibility for their security, and our combat mission will be over.
To add salt to injury, the U.S. government did not even have an idea about the money splurged. No exact accounting done. But why? Maybe this revelation was the answer made back in 2011, which is one of the pillars of the U.S. so-called empire.
Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful.
The Afghan president describes the killings as unforgivable. An American soldier is in custody after a shooting rampage that's left 16 civilians, some women and children, dead in Afghanistan's southern Kandahar province.
A shocking expose out today in The Intercept reveals CIA-backed death squads in Afghanistan have killed children as young as 8 years old in a series of night raids, many targeting madrasas, Islamic religious schools.
and they dragged the two oldest looking boys out of that room, took them into another room, along with 10 other older looking students. But as you already discussed, some of them were as young as 8 or 9 years old.
One of the assets that Afghanistan has, which has become a focus, is its mineral wealth. And one country in particular which appears to have its eye on it is China. Here you see China receiving a member of the Taliban recently. Since the U.S. has now withdrawn itself from the country, China may be looking to back the Taliban with Afghan mining investments. Rare earth metals in Afghanistan were estimated to be worth anywhere between $1 trillion and $3 trillion in 2020. Only hours after the Taliban overran Afghanistan, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesman said that Beijing was ready for friendly cooperation with Afghanistan.
中方将继续支持阿富汗和平重建，在力所能及的范围内，为阿富汗经济社会发展提供帮助。
Well, our guest in this section, Marvin Weinbaum, joins us. He is scholar in residence at the Middle East Institute. He's also a professor emeritus of political science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and served as analyst for Pakistan and Afghanistan in the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research from the years 1999 to 2003. Also rejoining us is Mohammad Dawood Abadi and Phyllis Bennis. Okay, Marvin, welcome. All those trillions of dollars, Afghanistan's still one of the smallest formal economies on the planet. Last year, President Ashraf Ghani said that 90% of the population was living on less than $2 a day. I mean, if the U.S. gave the money, the trillions of dollars away, the economy would be much larger. Why did this not translate to the Afghan economy?
Well, you know, a lot of it was lost through corruption. There's no question about that. This is something that the Afghans, as well as the international community, has some responsibility for. Certainly, there were the resources to do far more, but again, I don't want to minimize the fact that there has been change, and along with everything that went wrong, there was a good deal that did go right.
Only the money that the U.S. invested in Afghanistan went to the people, but it didn't. I mean, Afghans living on less than $2 per day, 90% of them. I mean, that's incredible. What really happened here? I mean, there's aid money also that's involved. Donor conferences produced billions of dollars in money every year, particularly since the invasion.
The money that was spent by the United States did not go to the people of Afghanistan. It went to a corrupt government that was put in place by the United States and that represented U.S. interests in maintaining their version of stability.
All right, Dawood, corruption, both from the U.S. and the Afghan side. You mentioned some of it before, unfinished projects, for example. We've talked about it, but why didn't the U.S. money and the aid money go to the Afghan people? Let's not forget, billions were given to Afghanistan on a yearly basis. I'm sure you know that. Ordinary Afghans, however, did not reap the benefits. What happened there?
The reason it didn't translate into an Afghan economy was because there was no planning. There was no structure. There was no strategy for spending the money. The money was in a way given to all these corrupt officials to keep their mouths shut.
All right. Well, let's look at another issue, and that's the mineral wealth of Afghanistan. Experts are saying it'll reap $1 trillion, the actual worth. And until now, the Taliban have not tapped into it. They have profited from opium and the heroin trade. How will the Taliban get to those resources, do you think, since it does not have the money, unless China becomes a partner in this, which it has said that it's willing to do so?
Well, I need to make a correction here. It is not $1 trillion, it is $3 trillion, according to the estimates given by the West. But let's not forget that that wealth belonged to the Taliban, to the Afghan people. The Taliban are Afghans, and that is their country, that's their wealth, and it's nobody's business how they want to use their money and how they don't want to use the money.
All right, we appreciate that. That's Mohammad Dawood there, contributing to our program. Mohammad Dawood is chairman of the Afghan Nation Peace Council and previously a spokesman and negotiator for the Hizb Islami group. Okay, we'll be right back with my final thoughts. If the U.S. actually leaves the country alone and leaves it for good, as is, it is withholding the government money that's held abroad, $9 billion worth. Now, this will be disastrous for an economy with a new administration. But the story of Afghanistan could have began 20 years ago. And if the U.S. had not invaded and then occupied it, it would have been, at a minimum, better than the state that it is in today. Make no mistake, we are not here to promote, defend, nor demonize the Taliban. Iran has stated that it will be a partner in a country that is looking for peace and stability, and has spoken to Russia and China about that. After all, it makes sense. Iran wants a stable neighbor that it can do trade with. But is the U.S. involvement with the Taliban over, or will it use the group against China or Iran? Only time will tell. That does for this edition of Economic Divide. I'm Kaveh Tagwi. It's good to have been with you.